Good morning.
Good morning.
Good to see you all here. The diehard party. Say the super faithful. Okay, good. We don't want to make anybody feel bad. So, all right, good to be with you this morning. We're going to be looking at Genesis chapter 12. And the story of Abraham. Abraham is a big piece of the puzzle when we start talking about our faith and how the Lord worked out our salvation that we have in Jesus Christ, going way back into history with Abraham. And it's important for us, I think, to have a good understanding of who he is and what God has done through him. Now, there are some things that are going to be true as long as this universe exists in its current configuration. It's going to, the sun will come up every day. It may be dreary, cloudy, snowing, and below zero. But the sun's going to come up. It's going to happen. Spring will eventually get here. It might not be June, but it's going to come. Right? And then it's going to get hot. Right? The thermometer will hit 90. It might have only hit 90 once last year or something like that, but it will happen. Right? Eventually. If it doesn't this year, it will happen next year. But there are certain things that we can count on in this universe, and it's that way, and it has to be that way because we do count on it. We live our lives that way. We live our lives knowing, or hoping at least, that spring will come. Because without spring, there will be no life. Eventually. We know that gravity is going to continue to hold us on the ground. And that the planet spinning isn't just going to toss us out into outer space. Because we don't have any hold here on this planet. But certain things are true, no matter what. And this is also true of God. And just give me one moment, if you would, because I just realized that I didn't change my settings here so that this display is going to stay on while I'm preaching. My notes are going to disappear on me. Then I'm going to have to quit, and everybody will be sad. I'll leave you hanging. Leave you hanging. So, just as everything is, there are so many things that are always going to be true as long as this universe exists. One of the things that is always going to be true, even when the universe is gone, is that God is always faithful. God is always, just like we count on gravity, just like we count on the sun coming up, just like we count on spring coming, we as believers in Jesus Christ, we count on the fact that God is always faithful. We could not live our lives in the faith that we do if God were not faithful. If we couldn't count on that fact, if we could not trust in the word that is given to us through the scriptures, knowing that God is going to always be faithful to his word 100% of the time, we couldn't do it. We couldn't do it. In fact, we would constantly be in a state of doubt, wondering if God is coming through. But the one thing that we know is certain is that God is faithful. Whatever the circumstances may be, whatever is happening to me in my life, whatever it seems like is happening around me, as the psalmist says, though 1,000 fall on my right hand and 10,000 fall on my left, yea, will I trust in him, because I know that God is faithful. And we see that in the story of Abraham. In Genesis chapter 12, it says, the Lord said to Abram, leave your country, your people, your father's household, and go to the land I will show you. This is a extremely intimidating call that God gives to Abraham. He tells him to leave everything he knows, everything that he thinks he can count on. Okay? Leave your country, And really that's the way it's translated in my Bible, but really the idea is there, leave your land. Leave your land behind, the land that you possess, the land you count on to make a living. And Abraham was really raised sheep and things like that. He had animals. And in the ancient world, that's how you counted your wealth. You counted your wealth by your head of cattle, your head of goats, all the things that you possessed in that way, because that's how you made your living. That's what made you a prosperous person. And so the Lord comes to Abraham and says, leave your land. Leave your land. That's like God coming to me and saying, quit your job. Quit your job and walk away from your house. Right? And walk away from your family. Leave your father's household and go to the land that I will show you. You know, he's not saying, hey, go to this place on the map right here. I've got something waiting for you there. He says, go to the land I will show you. And this is one of those instances where I wish I had a projector or some monitors and things like that, because I've got some pictures of where Abraham lived. And if you stand there today in the Ur of the Chaldees, in that area around Haran where he lived, and if you stand there and if God said to you, leave here and go, you know, if you look to the north, all you see is sand. You know, you look to the east and the west, and it's not, all you see is sand. That's all you see. There's nothing that you can see that's going to give you an indication of what God was leading him. But what God does give to Abraham, he says, leave your land, leave your father's household, leave your people, leave all your security, go to the land I will show you. But what he does give Abraham is a promise. He says, I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse. And all the peoples on the earth will be blessed through you. So this is what God gives to Abraham. A promised blessing. And this is something that God has done from the beginning, and this is something that God continues to do even to this day. Is that God has always promised to bless. Even when Adam and Eve sinned, he still took care of them. He still blessed them. You think, well, what does it mean to bless someone? Well, the idea of blessing is just to project good onto someone or something or on people's lives. And this is what God has done from us from the beginning. Just the fact that God is faithful, the fact that he even gives us breath. He gives us the rain. He gives us food. He gives us everything that we have, we know ultimately comes from God. And God continues to project good into our lives. Even if my satellite dish is frozen and I can't get the NFL Network. I know, it's crazy. It's insane when things like that happen. God is still blessing. He's still projecting good into my life. And so God calls him to leave all this. God calls him to go somewhere he can't see, doesn't know. But God gives him a promise and says, go to the land I will show you. And God is going to make good on this promise. But you know, the other thing that God does, that we see, God continues to bless mankind even to this day. He blesses Abraham, and he blessed Abraham's sons. God keeps this promise. And we who are believers in Jesus Christ are the heirs of that promise. And God continues to make good on these promises. And we know we can count on that. But the other thing that God does, in addition to blessing us, is that he calls us to bless others. Just as he did for Abraham here. He said to Abraham, I'm going to make you into a great nation. I will bless you. But then he says, I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. But not only am I going to project good into your life so that you are going to enjoy my grace and my goodness and my blessing, but he says, you are going to do this as well. You are going to be a blessing to others. And I think that we who, as the New Testament calls us all, the sons and daughters of Abraham, by faith, that just as Abraham was blessed by God and Abraham became a blessing, that we too are called to be a blessing. And you see this happen in Abraham's life and how one of the stories, kind of the side stories of Abraham's life, is he has this nephew named Lot. And that when Abraham decides to answer this call, it says that as Abraham left, as the Lord had told him, it says Lot went with him. His nephew Lot goes with him and follows this call that God makes for him to go to the land of Canaan. It says he took his wife Sarah and his nephew Lot and all the possessions they had accumulated and all the people they'd acquired in Haran, and they set out for the land of Canaan, and they arrived there. And what's interesting about that is that you see as Abram is blessed by God, Lot is blessed along with him. And and then there's a point where Abraham and Lot have to separate. And the reason they have to separate is because they've been so blessed and their herds have grown so much is that they can't be in the same spot. Because the land just cannot sustain both of their herds. And so Lot goes to the south and Abraham goes to the north. And then eventually some things happen there politically where Lot is actually taken prisoner by some kings. Well, Abram gets word about this. And you know what Abram does? He rounds up 318 men that he has working for him, essentially, who are militarily trained. He rounds up these 318 men. He forms a posse. And he goes down there and he rescues Lot. He brings him out. And when Abraham fights this battle, not only does he rescue Lot, but he ends up with all this loot. All this loot that he can't even deal with. He runs into the priest called Melchizedek, who is a priest of the God Most High, the one and only true God, and he gives 10% of the bounty to Melchizedek. And then there were some other kings that were there around him saying, hey, Abraham, take all this stuff. And Abraham says, you know what? I don't even want it. I don't even want it because I don't want people to say that I did this for the money, but I did this for the Lord. And that the Lord blessed me, and that the Lord made me prosper, and it was nobody else but the Lord who prospered me and blessed me. And so we see in Abram's life, both in his own life and in the life of those people around him, that God blesses him continually, and that the people around him also are being blessed. But, even in this story about Lot, is we see Abram not just sitting back and kind of letting the blessing ooze out, but he proactively goes after and helps Lot and does something to bless his nephew, to project good into his life. So I think this is an important example for us because as the people of God, as the children of Abraham by faith, that we too are called to be a blessing. That when we answer the call of God to believe Him, to trust Him, to answer His word, God is going to bless us. But we too are a blessing to others. We project good into one another's lives. In fact, I think one of the greatest ministries that the church has is simply the ministry of encouragement. In Hebrews chapter 10 it says, do not forsake the assembling of the saints. Do not forsake the assembling together. And I know there's not a lot of people here today because of below zero. Don't take this the wrong way. This is not a reprimand. But the scriptures tell us, don't forsake the assembly, but instead come together and encourage one another and spur one another on towards love and good deeds. But that's what coming together is all about. And there are times when we may be discouraged, we may be down. I know there's certainly times for me when this happens. But then we come together and we gather with the saints, and just something as simple as one of your brothers and sisters coming up and putting their arm on your back and saying, hey, I'm glad you're here. I'm glad you're here. It's good to see you. God bless you. And those simple kinds of things we can encourage one another to be faithful, but also just to project good into another person's life. So God continues to bless mankind, and He's blessing us, and we are called to be a blessing on top of that. But there are going to be times, and there are continually going to be times, just as the sun comes up every day and spring comes around every March or April, or May, or June, whatever. There is going to be times when we are experiencing trial and testing. There are going to be times when we experience trial and testing, and it's going to feel like, or seem like, we are not blessed. And there are going to be times where I don't feel like blessing somebody else. Because I am not being blessed. Or I am discouraged. And so we will be tested. Abraham was tested. Abraham was tested right away. It's very interesting that just as God calls Abraham to leave Haran and go to Canaan, and he takes Lot with him, and he says, I'm going to bless you. And he has this promise from God himself that he is living on. That in verse 10 of chapter 12 in Genesis, it says there was a famine in the land. Abram went down to Egypt to live there for a while because the famine was severe. And as he went about to enter Egypt, he said to his wife Sarah, I know what a beautiful woman you are. When the Egyptians see you, they will say, this is his wife, then they will kill me, but let you live. So say you are my sister, so that I will be treated well for your sake, and my life will be spared because of you. So times are tough. Times get tough. There's a famine in the land. Abraham and his wife have to go down to Egypt. And when they get there, Abram fears for his life. He fears for his life because he has this beautiful woman, Sarah, who is his wife, and he thinks they're going to try and take my wife, and if they think I'm her husband, they're going to kill me to do it. And maybe that's true. So what does Abram do? He concocts this idea. You say my sister, and essentially what he's doing is he's handing his wife over to somebody else. Okay? And when Abram came to Egypt, the Egyptians saw that she was a very beautiful woman. And when the Pharaoh's officials saw her, they praised her to Pharaoh, and she was taken into his palace. Okay? That's a euphemism for saying it was made part of his harem, is what was happening there. And he treated Abram well for her sake. Abram acquired sheep and cattle, male and female donkeys, men servants, maid servants, camels. So Abram's doing pretty good for himself. Right? But all this time, his wife is in the Pharaoh's harem. This is not exactly a godly arrangement. This is not an arrangement in which one can be blessed. And so the Lord inflicts serious diseases on Pharaoh and his household because of Abram's wife Sarah. And Pharaoh summoned Abram and said, what have you done to me? What have you done to me? Who bears the guilt for this? Well, it's Abram, because he's the one who came up with this plan. He's the one who concocted this scheme. He's the one who sent his wife to be part of Pharaoh's harem. Why didn't you just tell me she was your wife? Well, because you were going to kill me, that's why. Why did you say she's my sister so that I took her to be my wife? Now then, here's your wife, take her and go. Pharaoh gave orders about Abram to his men, and they sent him on his way, and his wife, and everything he had. So eventually, they get out of the scheme. But the point is that some bad things happened here. Why? Because Abram lied. He lied. And why did he lie? Because he feared. He feared for his life, his physical life. Even though he had this promise from God, did he not? Where God said, I'm going to bless you, and whoever blesses you, I will bless, and whoever curses you, I will curse. Even though he had this word from God, this promise from God, and had already experienced the blessings from God, he still was tested and really failed the test. But we also still see, even though he did not act in faith, we see God being faithful to his promise and showing grace to Abram for the sake of his promise, for the sake of his word. So God is faithful. God is faithful, and when God makes us a promise, we can trust it. Are we going to struggle? Of course we are, because Abraham struggled. Are we going to doubt the promises of God and fear that God's not going to come true? Yes, it's going to happen for us. But the example is given that even when that happens, we need to trust God because God is going to come through. If Abraham would have just said, hey, I am Abraham, this is my wife Sarah, what would have happened? Well, we don't know. But we do know that God is faithful. And that we should worship him because he is faithful. And that these tests will come. And that things are not always going to be easy. In fact, what was it the devil said to God about Job? Job, who suffered probably more than any other person in history for the sake of the Lord, other than maybe Jesus. The devil came to God and said, Job over here, the only reason he worships you is because he's got it so easy. He's got it so easy. Of course he's going to worship you. Why wouldn't he worship you? You give him cattle, you give him sons, you give him land, you give him all this. Why would he not worship you? And so God says to the devil, all right, well, let's test that theory. Let's test that theory. And of course, what makes Job a great man and what makes Job's story a great story and one that we can learn from is that Job persevered in his trial. And that all the things that you could possibly imagine that could torture a human being happened to Job. I mean, his sons were slaughtered, his possessions were taken, his health was taken. It got to the point where his own wife looked at him and said, why don't you just curse God and die? But Job's response was, though he slay me, yet will I trust in him. Was Job frustrated? Of course he was. Was Job asking why? That's the whole book. Job was asking why. Why is this happening to me? But even though he's asking the question, he was still faithful to God and did not sin. And he always said, if I could just talk to God, if I could just explain the situation to God, then this wouldn't happen. Of course, he finally got his chance. He got his chance in the story, and God's response to Job was, gird up your loins and stand like a man. I will question you. And where were you when I made the earth? Right? Is what he said to Job. Where were you? You want an explanation? Why do I have to explain things to you? Where were you when I made the earth? But nonetheless, Job was faithful. So, Job was faithful and God was faithful. And we can always trust on the fact that even though we are continually going to be tested, that God is faithful. And as the New Testament says, we will never be tempted or tried beyond what we can bear. That's what Paul tells the Corinthians. And Paul tells the Corinthians, you need to persevere. Hold on in your trials. Hold on in your temptations. Do not doubt God's word. Because God will never test you beyond what you were able to bear. So know that when whatever trial we might be experiencing, whatever test we might be experiencing, whatever temptation we might be experiencing, it is not so powerful that we cannot bear up under it. In fact, God is allowing it to happen to us, knowing that we can resist it. Knowing that we can overcome it. Otherwise, God wouldn't allow it. So, just as the sun comes up and gravity holds us on the face of the earth, we know God is faithful. God continues to bless us. He blesses us every day, whether we recognize it or not, but I think it's pretty easy for us to recognize it if we just open our eyes. Just as God blesses us, He calls us to be a blessing. And in that process of being blessed by God and trying to bless others, it's not always going to be perfect. We're going to experience bumps in the road, but even in those bumps in the road, we know that God is faithful to His word. Amen?
Before we sing song number 887, I'm going to pass around these buckets for the noisy collection.